Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: the trade war is on. President Trump saying he's in no rush to talk to Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping. This after he paused tariffs on Mexico and Canada after phone calls with their leaders.
It's fine. It's fine. We're going to do very well against China and against everybody else.
A wide array of goods could soon see their prices tick higher with a new China tariff now in effect, from clothing to toys, smartphones, and home appliances. Plus, a look at how the energy market could adapt to U.S.-China tariffs. U.S. authorities slapped more charges on a former Google engineer. He's accused of stealing trade secrets from the tech giant to benefit China's AI industry. And a meeting on Capitol Hill to tackle the fentanyl crisis that's claiming American lives. The big debate: whether to strip fentanyl from being used to treat pain in cancer patients. President Trump saying Tuesday that he's in no rush to speak to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. That's as the world's two largest economies kick off a tariff war.
Any update on when you would speak to President Xi?
No, we'll speak to him at the appropriate time. I'm in no rush. At the appropriate.
Do you think that conversation can lend itself to the type of freeze that it meant for the tariffs for Canada and
Well,
Mexico?
we'll see what happens.
China retaliated after Trump slapped 10% tariffs on Chinese imports on top of existing levies imposed during his first term. Beijing put a 15% levy on U.S. coal and natural gas, as well as a 10% levy on farm equipment and some American-made vehicles. China also tightened export controls on critical minerals and is launching a probe into Google. Here's Trump's reaction to China's counterstrike.
It's fine. It's fine. We're going to do very well against China and against everybody else. Right now, they've taken advantage of the Biden administration like I've never seen. The deficit with China is about $1 trillion. Think of it, $1 trillion. They're using our money to build their military. And Biden let that happen.
White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said a Trump-Xi call still needed to be scheduled. She added that the Chinese leader reached out to Trump to speak about the tariffs, possibly to negotiate. She added the White House would, quote, see how that call goes. The U.S. Postal Service said today it would accept parcels from China and Hong Kong, making a U-turn after a brief suspension Tuesday. In a statement, the post office said it was working with Customs and Border Protection to implement a collection mechanism for the new China tariffs. The agency did not give a reason for the change. It's unclear whether the previous suspension is related to an executive order President Trump signed last week. That order terminated a long-standing rule called the de minimis exemption that allowed anyone to ship packages worth less than $800 to the U.S. without duties or inspections. This change could affect e-commerce sites like Shein and Temu. Consumers may soon start to feel the little pain that President Trump described with the latest 10% tariff on all Chinese goods now in effect. What items could see the price bump first?
From the ultra-cheap apparel sold online shopping platforms to toys and electronic devices like computers and cell phones, these items could soon see their price tick higher. The latest data from 2023 shows nearly 4/5 of the smartphones and laptops Americans use are assembled by Chinese manufacturers, including Apple's products. Third-party sellers on Amazon that import products from China will also be affected by the tariff, as well as the viral Chinese e-commerce sites Shein, Temu, and AliExpress. President Trump suspended a trade exemption policy called de minimis, which allows shipments worth less than $800 to enter the U.S. duty-free. Now, analysts say all company shipments from China are subject to U.S. tariffs.
On the energy front, Goldman Sachs Tuesday said it believes China's retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. would have a relatively low impact on energy prices. After Trump's new tariff on Chinese goods took effect, China announced 15% tariffs on several types of coal and liquefied natural gas products, coming from the U.S., as well as 10% tariffs on U.S. crude oil. The levies are being seen as retaliation and are set to take effect next Monday. Goldman Sachs said it expects the U.S. to divest its market and redirect the impacted energy products to other allies in Asia, like South Korea and Japan. The bank emphasized China's tariffs won't change global supply or demand for these U.S. energy resources. Tit-for-tat tariffs between China and the U.S. as round 2 of the trade war between the U.S. and China heats up. What do the latest moves from the world's 2 biggest economies mean for the rest of the world? Are steeper tariffs on the way? We speak with Briggs, economist and CEO of Hard Asset Management, for insight. Christian, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here. Now, the tariffs on China kicked in today with China vowing retaliatory tariffs. Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping put tariffs on only $14 billion worth of American imports. That's a fraction of what Trump targeted, $525 billion. What do you think this tells us? Is this a strategic move by China?
Well, yeah, it's very strategic. What Xi Jinping is trying to do is he had to come up with something to be able to answer Trump's first round of tariffs. So he did a very smart thing. I will give him credit. He very clearly made just a small amount of gesture tariffs. You almost want to kind of say he kind of took the ball in this court and said, I'm not really going to throw it back at you like dodgeball and try to smack you too hard, but I am going to have to do something in order to keep myself from losing face. China does not want a trade war. We are the largest production buyer of everything that they make. So when we're the consumption of the end of their manufacturing, he cannot afford to have $1 trillion in trade deficit go away so quickly. So he had to make some kind of a gesture in order for his own people to respect him. But what he did do was some things. Now, we're going to have to see what Trump does, or Xi Jinping may actually increase that, but I don't think so. I think Trump's kind of got him in the corner right now. He doesn't want to do any more retaliation tariffs.
Now, Bloomberg is noting China's success at diversifying imports away from the U.S., but also China's own precarious economic situation, that China has more to lose. In your view, why would China impose its own tariffs first and not come to the negotiating table as we saw Mexico and Canada do?
Well, I think that China has always looked at themselves as a country that is ultimately going to try to take on the United States from a financial supremacy model.
Now, given the U.S. and China are the world's 2 biggest economies, what's the likely trickle-down impact on global trade if tariffs continue to escalate?
Well, the trickle-down effect is going to be inflation. There's no way around it. Now, that inflation can be mitigated in such a way that it has a nominal effect on the economy. And a lot of the markets have already priced in some kind of inflationary reaction on the tariffs. So when you're looking at the equity markets and even the interest rates on treasuries, they've got some of this pricing already done inside their values. But let's take it for a little bit here further down the road. If this thing becomes a tit-for-tat type of retaliatory or even an escalation in a full-blown trade wars, which I don't think it's going to quite get that high, but if it does, then inflation is going to pick up dramatically. See, think about this for a second. We consume about 70% of all the manufactured goods that come into America are made by foreign markets. So China obviously is the largest provider of that manufacturing. India and Mexico obviously being a second and third. So if they do continue to raise tariffs out of China, that will have a profound effect on pricing. Pricing is obviously inflationary as it moves up. So the Fed, in its own approach to either cutting rates or holding steady, may have to hold rates where they are, keeping rates elevated for some time to come, if in fact this thing continues to grow. And I do expect some kind of an escalation in tariffs. It may not be at the hyperinflation or the 100%, but I don't think China's going to back down. I think that President Xi Jinping has too much to lose within his own party to be able to sit there and take it. So he's going to have to come up with some ideas on how to counterbalance it. And you make a good point earlier. They are diversifying away from the U.S., not as dependent upon both the dollar as well as manufacturing orders that come from the U.S. They're now a global presence with the second largest economy in the world. So just remember, when you're looking at this, China is a lot bigger of a country and an economy than it was in President Trump's first term back in 16, 17. They've come a long way, especially with Briggs. But I do believe Trump has a plan. I believe he understands surgically and very tactfully applying tariffs 5, 10, 15%. His new Secretary of the Treasury is a rock star, very smart man, very gifted in the sense of understanding economics. So I would say this, let's give the president some time to work through these things. Let's all look at it from the standpoint of about a 3 to maybe 4 month time period. But I do believe that Trump will be victory on this one across the board, just like he was with Canada and Mexico.
Expanding on that, what's the likely impact for Americans? How will a trade war with no substantive deal impact them?
Well, okay, let's talk about the worst case. Trade wars, it's kind of like tic-tac-toe. Sometimes there are no winners. It's kind of a void. But in this case, I think China will lose the trade war. Now, the U.S. consumer is going to have to pay a pretty penny for this because, yes, you will then have escalating interest rates. In fact, don't be surprised if we do get in a full-blown trade war, which is, it's possible. I'm not going to say it's not likely. It could definitely get to that point. And so you make a good point by asking the question. The ramifications on a U.S. consumer, and just anybody for that matter, it's going to be $4,000, $5,000, maybe $6,000 a year in additional costs if it's a full-blown trade war. Remember back in the first term, the average family paid over $1,200 back then, and that was back in 17, 18. Now we've had inflation almost double pretty much everything across the board, especially in food, housing, energy prices are obviously double. So if we're going to see an escalation in the trade wars on the tariffs, this could actually push inflation into the low double digits. I mean, we could see 8-9%, and that would be horrific for the economy. Nobody's going to be able to win. China will lose and we'll lose. We may win in the long run, but at least in the near term, this could be devastating for the economy.
A lot at stake here. Christian Briggs, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next, let's pivot to the justice system, where the charges against one Chinese national are piling up. Leon Ding is accused of stealing trade secrets from Google to benefit China's AI industry. The Justice Department expanded a 14-count indictment against Ding on Tuesday. The defendant was indicted last March on 4 counts of stealing U.S. technology, but now he faces 7 counts each of economic espionage and theft of trade secrets. Prosecutors said Ding joined Google in May 2019 and began his stealing efforts 3 years later. That's while he was secretly working for 2 Chinese tech firms at the same time. As for the information he allegedly stole, the indictment says Ding snatched over 500 confidential files and uploaded them to his personal cloud account. The files were about the hardware infrastructure Google uses to train its AI models. According to the DOJ, Ding founded a startup in China back in 2023. He also applied for a so-called talent program that incentivizes people to bring tech know-how back to China. A Google spokesperson said the company has been cooperating with law enforcement on the investigation. If convicted, Ding could serve up to 15 years behind bars for each count of economic espionage. That's in addition to a maximum 10-year term for each trade secrets charge. Should the U.S. permanently classify fentanyl as a Schedule I drug? That was the main focus at a Senate hearing Tuesday. China's role in the trafficking process was also a hot topic. A quick refresher, permanently classifying fentanyl as a Schedule I drug would strip it from legitimate medical uses, such as treating pain in cancer patients or surgeries. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
The Senate Judiciary Committee met to discuss the latest in the U.S. fentanyl crisis. Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley says that the drug cartels must be stopped before they flood the U.S. with even deadlier versions of fentanyl.
In the last 4 years, from which we have data, that'd be 2 years ago, around 75,000 lives were lost to fentanyl alone, and that happens to work out to be about 200 people dying every day.
The committee's goal was to discuss the current fentanyl situation and the need to classify it permanently. Fentanyl has a temporary classification as a Schedule I drug, which is set to expire on March 31st.
That's why I hope that this committee supports the Halt Fentanyl Act, an act to permanently classify fentanyl-related substances as Schedule I under the Controlled Substances Act.
The way illegal fentanyl is coming into the U.S. is complex. However, the main process is most of it is made from precursor chemicals coming from China. Then cartels are smuggling the finished fentanyl in through the southern and northern borders.
China is the first domino that tips in contributing to the fentanyl crisis. They are the contributor of the vast majority of the precursor chemicals, and if we deal with that, that would be the first great first step in dealing with it.
When they say they're not, they're lying, right?
I would say they're not being truthful, yes.
The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party concluded that the Chinese regime is providing financial support to companies that make these precursor chemicals.
It wasn't until we did the investigation as a committee that we discovered they're actually subsidizing, they're giving tax rebates for the production of these fentanyl precursors, which are poisoning Americans.
President Trump has been actively negotiating with Canada, Mexico, and China to tackle the fentanyl crisis and other issues at the U.S. borders. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, the House Select China Committee gets a second term. NTD sat down with the committee's chairman, Congressman John Moolenaar, to talk about Chinese hacking and DeepSeek AI, plus his bill looking to end China's permanent trade relations.
What we propose is 100% tariffs on these strategic sectors.
That and more after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. House Speaker Mike Johnson has renewed the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party for a second term. Johnson called its work crucial to national security. The committee is led by Chairman John Moolenaar. It will continue efforts to counter Beijing's growing influence, targeting issues like forced labor, critical mineral supply chains, and Chinese military-linked investments. Lawmakers have also reintroduced a bill to revoke China's trade status, citing economic and security threats. Johnson says the CCP remains the greatest global threat and vowed to strengthen U.S. defenses against its aggression. A bipartisan bill called the Restoring Trade Fairness Act aims to revoke China's permanent normal trade relations. This follows President Trump's executive order directing his cabinet to address trade between the U.S. and China. NTD's Steve Lance sat down with the bill's sponsor, Republican Congressman John Moolenaar of Michigan. He's the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party.
Chairman John Moolenaar, thank you so much for sitting down.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you back. Chairman, you recently introduced something called the Restoring Trade Fairness Act to revoke China's permanent normal trade relations status. What specific trade practices or policies from China do you see as the most harmful to American businesses and workers?
Well, first of all, just to revoke something that's it's not normal, and their trading relationship relies on overcapacity, subsidizing, stealing intellectual property, all sorts of violations from normal trading relationships. So it's only fitting that we reset that trade relationship to make sure it's fair to the American people.
And, you know, when it comes to economic strategy, if you will, how does your committee plan to ensure that revoking China's PNTR for short status will benefit U.S. manufacturing without escalating trade tensions or harming American consumers?
Well, clearly, China will retaliate. But what we realize is that we need to have very high tariffs. And what we propose is 100% tariffs on these strategic sectors. And you think of advanced batteries or semiconductors, some of these important technology areas where they are trying to catch up to us. And we want to make sure we restrict that and invest in that here in our country. Because many of these applications are used for military purposes and could be used actually against our own people. We propose a lower tariff rate for some of the less strategic kinds of goods. So they will retaliate, but they have a lot more to lose by losing the American market. And we just have to make sure that we stay ahead in the technology game, because ultimately they are being more threatening militarily, economically, not playing by the rules in any sense. And we need to react to that and right size and make that relationship a reset.
You really have your work cut out for you being in charge of this committee, because when you put things into perspective, the threat from the Chinese Communist Party is far greater than their military threat. When it comes to asymmetric warfare, basically non-kinetic, when they're trying to cause all kinds of disruptions within our society and destabilizing our society through infiltration in different means, how concerning is some of this more transnational repression and things they're doing to destabilize our society?
Well, one thing is, in this deep-seek AI technology, they will suppress any negative information about the Chinese Communist Party. So all the atrocities, all the oppression that they've had in their own people, they will not allow that. So you're seeing a vast censorship, and that's the control of the Chinese Communist Party. And when you can see the hacking that they've done, both in our infrastructure as well as our telecommunications, these are threats that are aggressive in nature and compromise our systems, and it's something that we need to be aware of and respond accordingly.
If you could, unpack some of these hacks. There's one called Salt Typhoon, another one that has recently happened.
Sure.
How widespread is this?
Well, what we know of is Salt Typhoon was more on the telecommunications. Volt Typhoon was in our strategic infrastructure. Basically, if you think of that concept of a sleeper cell, something that can be switched at any time to disrupt our way of life. And that was embedded in our infrastructure in different areas, and they're continuing to do that in a way that if they were ever to do something, invade Taiwan, for instance, they could disrupt our daily lives so that Americans would turn on each other and feel threatened.
Now, with regard to competitiveness, strengthening American industries is a key part of competing with China. What are your committee's priorities in fostering innovation, particularly in sectors like semiconductors and renewable energy?
Well, again, we want to have tariffs to prevent them from dumping into our markets. We want to make sure that we invest in our own technologies. But we also want to make sure we're leading in some of these areas and have both export controls so that they aren't getting the most advanced chips, and also cut off some of these investments. When you think of the outbound investment that's going into China right now by American dollars, and sometimes it's taxpayer dollars, going to fund Chinese entities that partner with the Chinese military, that needs to end.
Chairman John Moolenaar, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.